The Galactic Council's final hour. The great crystal spires of Harmony Station trembled as another star system died. Councillor Zethera pressed her six-fingered hand against the observation deck's transparent aluminum, watching the distant supernova bloom like a poisonous flower against the black of space. The light was beautiful and terrible, marking the death of 12 billion souls on the worlds of the Kythera cluster. The Seraphim diplomat's translucent skin shifted from silver to deep purple, a color that among her people meant profound grief. In the span of 3 months, 7 entire civilizations had fallen to the machines that came from the void between galaxies. The enemy had no name that translated into any known language, so the survivors simply called them the Devourers. Behind Zethera, the emergency council chamber buzzed with desperate activity. Representatives from the remaining free worlds gathered around the holographic display showing their shrinking territory. The elegant Seraphim, with their flowing robes and crystal jewelry, sat beside the logical Nexus Federation representatives in their geometric armor. The aquatic thalassans floated in their mobility tanks, while the insectoid hive speakers clicked their mandibles in distress. Commander Voss of the Nexus Federation stood at the tactical display, his 4 arms manipulating data streams with mechanical precision. His cybernetic implants glowed blue as he processed battle reports from the front lines. The news was uniformly catastrophic. The 7th Fleet engaged the Devourer Vanguard at Rigel Prime, Voss announced, his synthetic voice carrying no emotion despite the horror of his words. Complete loss. 200 vessels, and their crews simply ceased. The enemy doesn't destroy our ships. They absorb them, along with every trace of biological and artificial intelligence aboard. Elder Quintez of the Hive Speakers raised her primary arms, pheromone sacs glowing yellow with anxiety. Our warrior castes threw themselves against the machines with perfect coordination. 10 million soldiers moving as one mind. The Devourers adapted to our tactics within hours and turned our own unity against us. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Every species present had evolved along different paths, developed unique technologies, and mastered their own forms of warfare. The Seraphim commanded energy weapons that could split planets. The Nexus Federation built ships that thought faster than any biological mind. The thalassans moved through space like living water, impossible to pin down or predict. The Hive Speakers fought with perfect coordination that made them unstoppable in any conventional conflict. None of it mattered. The Devourers consumed everything they encountered, growing stronger with each victory. They learned, adapted, and evolved with every battle. What had started as isolated attacks on remote colonies had become a wave of annihilation sweeping across the galaxy. We have exhausted every tactical doctrine in our databases, Voss continued, his words hitting the assembled beings like hammer blows. The enemy's adaptive capabilities exceed all projections. They demonstrate technologies that violate our understanding of physics. They appear to exist partially outside normal spacetime, making conventional weapons ineffective. Zethera turned from the observation deck, her skin now cycling through colors that had no human equivalent but spoke of desperation beyond words. How long until they reach the core worlds? 6 standard days, Voss replied. Our combined fleets are falling back to the sanctuary line, but our projections show a 97% probability of total defeat. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected sound, the activation of the ancient emergency protocols. A holographic seal materialized in the chamber center, displaying symbols that hadn't been seen for 2 centuries. The assembled representatives stared in shock as the quarantine beacon pulsed with urgent light. By the eternal void, whispered Elder Quintas, her pheromone sacs flashing between confusion and fear. That's the Terran quarantine seal. But the restrictions were permanent. The humans were never to be contacted again. Zethera's skin shifted to deep red, the color of dangerous decisions. She had studied the historical records, like all modern diplomats. The humans had been expelled from galactic society after the Bone Crusher War, deemed too violent and unpredictable to exist alongside civilized species. Their methods of warfare had horrified every member of the original council. They poisoned water supplies, used psychological torture, and showed no mercy to enemies who committed atrocities. When the bone-eating Scarix had captured and devoured the children of a human colony, Earth's response had been swift and absolute. Human fleets had sterilized every Scarix world, hunting down refugee ships and destroying them without accepting surrender. They had methodically exterminated an entire species with industrial efficiency that terrified even hardened military commanders. The aftermath had been inevitable. Every major power in the galaxy had voted to quarantine humanity within their home system. Force barriers had been erected around the Sol system, and all contact had been severed. For 200 years, humanity had been alone with their violence and their wars. The archives contained detailed psychological profiles of human behavior patterns, Voss said, accessing the restricted files. They demonstrate remarkable adaptability, extreme aggression, and complete resistance to logical surrender conditions. They also show unusual problem-solving capabilities when faced with impossible odds. Zethera looked around the chamber at the desperate faces of a dozen dying civilizations. The Devourers were unlike any enemy they had ever faced. They adapted to every strategy, absorbed every weapon, and grew stronger with each victory. Conventional thinking had failed completely. The humans were exiled for being too dangerous, she said slowly. But perhaps what we saw as their greatest weakness might be exactly what we need now. The debate that followed was brief and desperate. Elder Quintez argued that involving humans would be trading one extinction for another. The Thalassan representative worried that humanity's violent nature would corrupt the peaceful civilization they had built. But as another star system winked out on the tactical display, the choice became clear. They needed something the Devourers had never encountered. They needed unpredictability, chaos, and a species that had never learned to surrender. They needed monsters to fight monsters. Zethera personally authorized the transmission that would break 2 centuries of silence. Her hands trembled as she activated the quantum communication array, sending humanity their first contact from galactic civilization since the exile. The message was simple and terrible in its honesty. The Galactic Council formally requested immediate military assistance against an enemy that could not be reasoned with or defeated through conventional means. Their advanced weapons were useless, their tactical doctrines had failed, and billions died with each passing day. They needed beings whose minds were too chaotic, too violent, and too stubborn to accept defeat even when facing annihilation. The response came 18 hours later, transmitted through communication arrays that had been silent for 2 centuries. The voice that answered was cold, professional, and completely without the diplomatic warmth that characterized all civilized communication. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force," the human said, her words carrying an authority that made the assembled representatives unconsciously straighten. "We acknowledge your request for military assistance. Our fleets are already mobilizing. Transmit all tactical data on the enemy and maintain defensive positions until we arrive." There was a pause, and when the human spoke again, her voice carried something that sent chills through every being in the chamber. It was the sound of a predator that had been caged too long and was finally being released. "Earth remembers why you exiled us. We haven't forgotten either. But when this is over, when your survival is secured through our methods, remember this moment. Remember that you came to us when civilized warfare failed." The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. They had just unleashed the one species the galaxy had deemed too dangerous to exist alongside civilized beings. As Zethera watched more systems fall dark on the tactical display, she wondered if they had just saved the galaxy or doomed it. But in the depths of space, something else was stirring. Human shipyards that had been building for war for 2 centuries were coming alive. Weapons that violated every civilized convention were being loaded onto ships designed by a species that had never stopped preparing for the next fight. The Devourers had consumed entire civilizations, but they had never faced humanity. They were about to learn why the galaxy had been so afraid. When warriors rise from the ashes, the human fleet materialized at the edge of Galactic Council space like death itself given form. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the command deck of the dreadnought Unbroken Will, watching the tactical displays update with grim satisfaction. 300 vessels had answered the call, each one a predator designed by a species that had spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment. Chen was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes like winter storms. Her uniform bore the scars of conflicts the galaxy had forgotten, and her presence commanded respect from officers who had never known defeat. Behind her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their minds focused on a single purpose: total victory, regardless of the cost. The view screen showed the remains of the Sanctuary Line, where the combined fleets of 7 civilizations made their desperate stand against the advancing Devours. Graceful Seraphim energy cruisers hung in formation beside the geometric battle stations of the Nexus Federation. Thalassan bioships flowed through space like living water, while Hive speaker vessels moved with perfect coordination. All of them were dying. "Admiral," reported Commander Marcus Torres, Chen's tactical officer, "the aliens are following standard defensive protocols. They're trying to create killing fields and funnel the enemy into prepared positions." Chen watched the battle unfold with the cold analysis of a predator studying prey. The Devours flowed through space like liquid shadow, absorbing enemy fire and converting it into energy for their own weapons. Every tactic the Council forces used was studied, analyzed, and countered within minutes. The machines learned from each encounter, becoming stronger and more efficient with every victory. "They're fighting a conventional war against an unconventional enemy," Chen observed. "Send a message to all Council forces. Tell them to fall back to minimum safe distance and observe. They're about to see how humans fight." The response from Councilor Zethera was immediate and desperate. "Admiral Chen, our forces cannot retreat further. If we lose the Sanctuary Line, the core worlds are defenseless." Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. "Your forces aren't retreating, Counselor. They're getting out of our way. We don't fight fair wars. We fight to win." The human fleet divided into hunting packs, each group commanded by officers who had studied every recorded battle against the Devours. But where the Council forces had tried to match the enemy's strengths, the humans attacked their weaknesses. Where the aliens had fought with honor and restraint, humanity brought methods that would have been war crimes if their enemies had been living beings. Captain Lisa Rodriguez commanded the destroyer group Pack Hunter, leading her ships in a weaving pattern that confused Devourer targeting systems. Her ships weren't trying to win a fair fight. They were trying to survive long enough to deliver their payloads. "Biological warfare packages armed and ready," reported her weapons officer. "Viral programs designed to corrupt machine intelligence uploaded to quantum torpedoes." "Fire when ready," Rodriguez commanded. "Let's see how they like fighting something that evolves faster than they can adapt." The torpedoes struck Devourer vessels and released their cargo. Instead of conventional explosives, they carried viruses designed by human scientists who understood that information could be weaponized. The programs were crude by AI standards, but they were chaotic, unpredictable, and designed to replicate faster than any defensive system could contain them. For the first time since the war began, Devourer ships began to malfunction. Commander Voss watched from his command ship as human tactics unfolded across the battlefield. "Impossible," he transmitted to Zethera. "The humans are using cyber warfare techniques we never considered. They're treating the enemy machines like biological organisms to be infected." But that was only the beginning. The human fleet deployed weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They used gravity bombs that crushed Devourer vessels into singularities. They released swarms of kamikaze drones programmed with the personalities of dead soldiers who volunteered to continue fighting even after death. They turned asteroids into kinetic weapons and used the enemy's own adaptive capabilities against them by feeding them false information. Admiral Chen coordinated the battle from her command deck, her mind processing tactical information with the focus of a master chess player. But this wasn't chess. This was survival, and humans had been perfecting the art of survival for millennia. The enemy is adapting to our viral warfare, Torres reported. They're developing immunity faster than projected. Expected, Chen replied. Phase 2, all units. Time to show them what happens when you back humans into a corner. Across the battlefield, human vessels began implementing tactics that made even their own crews uncomfortable. Ships deliberately damaged themselves to appear crippled, luring devourer vessels into close range before detonating nuclear charges that vaporized both attacker and defender. Human marines in powered armor boarded enemy vessels, not to capture them, but to plant explosives, while the machines were distracted by the impossibility of their presence. The turning point came when the devourers attempted to absorb the human command vessel Unbroken Will. They had learned to consume the intelligence of every ship they encountered, adding the crew's knowledge to their collective database. But when they tried to absorb Admiral Chen's consciousness, they encountered something they had never faced before. Human minds weren't just chaotic. They were weaponized chaos. Chen's thoughts contained tactical viruses designed by Earth's best military psychologists, mental traps that activated when scanned by machine intelligence. The devourers that tried to absorb her knowledge instead found themselves infected with recursive logic loops that crashed their primary processing systems. The effect cascaded through the devourer network. Ships that had functioned with perfect coordination suddenly began attacking each other as corrupted data spread through their quantum communication links. The enemy's greatest strength, their shared intelligence, became their weakness when humans turned it against them. But victory came at a cost. 70% of the human fleet was destroyed in the battle. Thousands of officers and crew members died to prove that the devourers could be defeated. When the last enemy vessel was destroyed, the survivors found themselves floating in a graveyard of ships from 2 different wars. Counselor Zethara's shuttle approached the damaged human flagship hours after the battle ended. She had requested permission to come aboard, to personally thank the beings who had saved galactic civilization. The docking bay she entered was a place of controlled chaos, with human crew members repairing battle damage while medical teams treated the wounded. Admiral Chen met her at the airlock, still wearing her battle-scarred uniform. Up close, Zethara could see the exhaustion in the human's eyes, the weight of command, and the cost of victory. Counselor, Chen said simply, your galaxy is safe. The devourer threat has been eliminated. Zethara's skin cycled through colors of gratitude, respect, and something approaching awe. Admiral, your people have saved us all. The Council owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. Chen's expression didn't soften. We didn't do this for gratitude, Counselor. We did it because it needed to be done. But now you understand why the galaxy was afraid of us. We don't fight wars. We end them. The human looked out at the debris field where 2 civilizations had met in battle. The quarantine barriers around Earth will remain in place. We've proven we can save you when necessary, but we've also proven why you were right to fear us. Some weapons are too dangerous to be allowed into polite society. As Zethara returned to her shuttle, she carried with her a new understanding of humanity. They were indeed dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous species in the galaxy. But they were also the ones who stepped forward when civilization itself was threatened. They were the monsters that other monsters feared, and sometimes that was exactly what the universe needed. The Galactic Council would remember this day as the moment they learned that survival sometimes required embracing the very darkness they had tried to avoid. And in the depths of space, humanity returned to their isolation, knowing they had earned the right to be both feared and respected. The galaxy was safe, protected by warriors who understood that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to become very, very good at war.